Hello, this is Christina Fitzpatrick of AARP New Hampshire, and I want to welcome you to this important discussion on voting in the upcoming primary and general election. AARP, a nonprofit, nonpartisan member organization, has been working to promote the health and well-being of Americans 50 plus for more than 60 years. AARP New Hampshire is working to ensure that all Granite Staters get the information they need to understand how to cast a ballot this fall. If you have questions about changing party affiliation, voting from home, absentee voting, or voting in person for the New Hampshire primary on September 10th or the general election on November 5th, you're in the right place. Joining us today for this important discussion is our special guest, Secretary of State David Scanlan. Secretary Scanlan will discuss the upcoming deadline for changing party affiliation, what we need to understand about misinformation and disinformation in elections, and how the voting process works. He'll also answer your questions to make sure you have the information you need to exercise your right to vote. If you've participated in one of our Teletown halls before, you know this is similar to a radio talk show, and you'll have the opportunity to ask questions live. If you would like to ask a question about the election, press *3 on your telephone keypad to be connected with an AARP representative who will note your name and question and place you in a queue to ask that question live. The sooner you press *3, the sooner you will be back online and able to ask questions directly to our guest. If you are listening on Facebook, just type your question in the chat. And keep a pen and paper handy, as we'll be sharing some helpful information, phone numbers, and websites that you may want to jot down. For those of you who have just joined us, this is Christina Fitzpatrick, State Director of AARP New Hampshire, and I want to welcome you to this important discussion with New Hampshire Secretary of State David Scanlan. We'll be taking your questions live if you press *3 on your telephone keypad or if you enter your question into Facebook. Secretary Scanlan, thank you very much for joining us today.
Hi, Christina. Nice to be with you.
Hi. Good. I'll get us started with a few questions, and then we'll take callers' questions. There's an important deadline coming up for changing party affiliation. Why is it important for people to check their party affiliation, and how can they do it?
So on June 4th of this year, there is a deadline for voters to change their party affiliation before the state primary, which is held in September. The reason that it is so early is because the filing period for state office opens up on June 5th and runs for the next week and a half through Friday, June 14th. And it locks in voters' party affiliation so that games cannot be played by switching over into the other party's primary, depending on who the candidates might be. So what happens on occasion is that there are undeclared voters in the state who can actually go into the polls on the day of the primary election and decide which party they would like to affiliate with. So they can choose either a Republican or a Democratic ballot and vote on that party's ballot. And then if they want to, they can change back to undeclared status when they leave the polling place. What happens in previous elections are that there are voters who have been undeclared that have voted in a party's primary but decided for whatever reason they did not want to change back to undeclared when they leave the polling place. And then time goes by and they forget that they did that. And what happens is in a subsequent election, they show up at the polls thinking, one, that they're still undeclared or wanting to vote in the other party's primary, but they find out that they're actually recorded as a member of the party in which they don't want to vote. And that causes frustration, sometimes anger, and so we try and avoid that by trying to remind people well in advance that you should check your party affiliation, and that can be done on the Secretary of State's website, which is sos.nh.gov. so sos.nh.gov. And you can look up your party affiliation as it's currently registered. And if you would like that affiliation to be different, then you can either show up at the town clerk's office or at a meeting of the town supervisors of the checklist by June 4th, and you can change that party affiliation.
Good, thank you. So can people also go to the town offices if they want to check what their party registration is?
Yes, you can either look your party affiliation up online, or you can go to your town clerk and ask for a verification. Most town offices have a checklist, a voter checklist posted, so you can take a look at that checklist and see. Just make sure that your registration information in general is correct.
Good, thank you. So that's Secretary of State Dave Scanlan. I am Christina Fitzpatrick with AARP New Hampshire, and this is a live telephone town hall to talk about voting in the upcoming elections. If you'd like to ask a question at any time, you can press *3 on your telephone keypad to be connected with an AARP representative who will note your question and put you in a queue. If you are listening on Facebook, just type your question in the chat. So Secretary Scanlan, you recently testified before Congress. Tell us more about the topic you addressed and how that came about.
Well, a major concern of secretaries of state around the country in the last 15 to 20 years has been the spread of misinformation and disinformation. And with technology the way it has advanced today, we know that through social media and other electronic platforms that information travels instantaneously. I mean, news today is delivered almost as quickly as events happen. And that fact has taken a pretty sharp turn more recently with the advent of artificial intelligence. And that technology has developed to the point that images and voices of political leaders, candidates, politicians, even secretaries of state and individuals who administer elections can see an image of themselves speaking and doing things that may have never happened because it has been generated with artificial intelligence. And that is a really significant concern because of the ability to even more dramatically spread misinformation and disinformation in a malicious way. And so that's why I was speaking to Congress to talk about an event that actually happened in New Hampshire in the presidential primary that was held in January, where there was a robocall that was disseminated using the voice of President Biden to tell voters not to worry about voting in the presidential primary, that their vote was actually more important for the general election and that you should save your vote until November. That message sounded very real. The message itself was a form of voter suppression. But even though it sounded real and was convincing, the way the message was delivered gave the voters pause, where they thought, probably ought to check this out. Something doesn't seem quite right about it. So from that standpoint, it was not as effective as it could have been. But a more sophisticated message that was generated with artificial intelligence could have been very, very damaging. And so it is something that we have to stay on top of, be able to identify, stop, and then prosecute individuals that are involved with doing that in a malicious way.
You refer to misinformation and disinformation. What's the difference between the two?
Well, misinformation is inaccurate information. It's wrong information. It's misleading information that is out there and it is not being delivered with an understanding that that information is incorrect. Disinformation is the same misinformation, wrong information, but the person that is delivering it knows that it is incorrect. So on one hand, it may be wrong information, but it is delivered in an innocent way. The other way is it's incorrect information, and it is intentionally delivered to try and be deceitful or influence an action, or in this case, an election, in a malicious way. We see that throughout history and campaigns where we know that as we get closer to the election, candidates kind of take the gloves off and they stretch the truth in many ways about their opponent. And so misinformation and disinformation is nothing new. What is different today is that with artificial intelligence, it can be delivered in a way that makes it look like the candidate, him or herself, is actually delivering the information. And that is somewhat alarming.
What can we do to fight that?
Well, the best way to respond is just, first of all, be aware that this condition exists. And if you hear information or even see information that doesn't seem right or is misleading, or that you want to clarify, whether it's information about elections or whether it's the messaging from a candidate, it's best to go to the source of the accurate information and ask for clarification. So if it's something that a candidate said or something that somebody said a candidate said that you don't believe, go to the candidate, go to the campaign and ask if that's the correct position. Or in the case of elections, if it's information about a polling place or polling hours or how to cast a ballot, how to cast an absentee ballot, and if you have questions about that, go to an election official, go to your town clerk or your town moderator, or call the Secretary of State and ask, how that action is properly done so that you get the accurate information.
Thank you so much. That is Secretary of State David Scanlan. I'm Christina Fitzpatrick with AARP New Hampshire. As I stated earlier, this is an interactive call, so if you'd like to ask a question at any time, just press *3 on your telephone keypad to be connected with someone who will note your name and question and place you in the queue. If you are listening on Facebook, just type your question in the chat. Secretary Scanlan, New Hampshire purges the voting rolls every 10 years. Please tell us what that means and why New Hampshire does that.
Well, it's very important that voter checklists or voting rolls are kept as up-to-date as possible. The voter checklists is a very important document that is always changing, and it is the document that is used by election officials on the day of the election to have a list of eligible voters and to be able to cross voters off the list when they go to the polling place to vote, either in person or by absentee. And as time goes on, if the lists are not updated, you end up with people on the list who have moved out of town, maybe to a different state. There might be people on there who have passed away. There may be people who are on there that are ineligible for other reasons, and yet their name is still on the checklist. So the current statute says that every 10 years the list should be verified. It's frequently called purge, but it's actually a verification of the checklist. And the local election officials, more specifically the supervisors of the checklist, are instructed to identify the voters who on the list who have not participated in an election for 2 full election cycles or 4 complete years. And those voters are then sent a letter saying that their name is being removed from the list, and to get back on it, they should re-register. In New Hampshire, that can also be done on the day of the election. So if a person's name has been removed, there's a quick remedy to be able to get back on the checklist. The legislature more recently has been really concerned about making sure that the checklist information is even more up to date. And so they have been requiring things like using information from the National Change of Address database put out by the U.S. Postal Service. They have been wanting to get faster updates on information of deceased voters. And now there's currently a bill before the legislature which would require a more frequent verification of the checklist, which would be done at 4-year cycles instead of the current 10-year cycle.
So how can people check to see whether they're still registered to vote?
Well, again, you can go to the Secretary of State website, which is sos.nh.gov, and you can get on the voter lookup app that's on the website and check your party affiliation and your party registration, your voter registration information generally. And in the alternative, you can either call or visit your town clerk and request that same information, or you can attend a meeting of the supervisors of the checklist in every city or town, and they are required to meet by statute, usually in fairly close proximity to elections.
Great. So if you are just joining us, my name is Christina Fitzpatrick, and I am from AARP, New Hampshire. We have a special guest today, Secretary of State Dave Scanlan. If you would like to ask a question, please press *3 on your telephone keypad. And if you are listening on Facebook, just type your question in the chat. What documents do people need to bring with them when they go to register to vote?
At the current time, when a voter goes to register, they have to be able to prove their identity, their age, their domicile, which is their residence, and their citizenship. And there are presumptive forms of proof that can be used, anything from driver's license for identity, and I think the birth date is still on a driver's license, or a passport proves domicile, age, and citizenship, birth certificates, naturalization papers, utility bills. If a voter currently does not have those items with them when they go to a polling place, then they can fill out an affidavit verifying under the penalties of voter fraud that the information that they're providing is true. There's currently before the legislature a couple of pieces of legislation that would really tighten up that requirement and place a much greater emphasis on actually providing the documentation and not having the ability to use affidavits to prove those qualifications. So the voters will have to pay attention to what comes out of this legislature. But the easiest thing is if you have the documents in your possession when you go to register to vote for the first time, bring something that shows your identity, verifies your age, your residence or your domicile, and your citizenship. And if you have that documentation, you'll be able to register no problem at all. And for the time being, the affidavits are still available if you don't have any of those items. And in a polling place, if you know an election official or the election official knows you, that certainly is one way that you can prove identity at the polling place.
Great, thank you. Now let's talk about voting by mail. Who is eligible to vote by mail?
So New Hampshire does not have no excuse absentee voting or vote by mail. Absentee voters can vote absentee and receive their ballot through the mail if they are absent from the town or if they have a disability. And those two requirements are in our state constitution. The absence and disability have been broken down more specifically to mean that if a person is at work, for example, during the entire time that the polls are open, that's an absence and reason to get an absentee ballot. If a person has a religious observance on the same day, the same thing. There are provisions in the statute for requesting an absentee ballot if you are concerned about a severe weather event that is being called for by the National Weather Service. In other words, if it's a major snowstorm and you have concern about your safety, walking on a sidewalk or driving down the road, that is a reason to get an absentee ballot the day before the election. The statute's very specific on that. So if you fit into one of those categories, then you can request an absentee ballot.
Thank you. Now we have a question about absentee ballots from Dan in Salem. Dan, go ahead with your question.
I'm just curious. I used to be a Republican, but I've been forced out of there due to certain conflicts of common sense and decency. So I'm a registered independent now, and I don't want to hear from my Republican friends that there's a problem in authenticating my absentee vote if I choose to do that. I have muscular dystrophy, and it's not easy for me to get in and out of the polls. If I fall, I'd have people pick me up and so forth. So I'm planning on perhaps using the absentee voting if I have to, but I don't want to have a conflict that there's something wrong with that. How do they verify that my absentee vote is authentic to me? Do they have a specimen signature of my signature to compare an absentee vote to?
So, Dan, that's a really good question. And in New Hampshire, absentee voting it's primarily an honor system. And what you described to me sounds like you certainly qualify for an absentee ballot if you choose to request and vote on one. Excuse me. In New Hampshire, there was a court case actually about the requirement to compare the signature on the application for an absentee ballot to the signature that is contained on the affidavit that is on the affidavit envelope, which contains your absentee ballot when it is delivered to the town clerk. And when the moderator is going through, they used to be able to look at the signatures and compare them on the application to the affidavit on the envelope. And if it looked like they did not match, the moderator could reject that ballot. The court said that people's signatures, individuals' signatures, can vary from day to day, and that unless a person was adequately trained on signature matching, then signature matching could not take place in terms of being able to reject a ballot. As long as the name on both documents was the same, the moderator would have to accept it. Now, there are some checks and balances that are at play. In other words, the voter has to make the application for an absentee ballot to their town clerk in their town, no other place. The town clerk records that request in the state voter registration database and then sends the voter the absentee voting packet. That gets entered into the database. When the voter returns the absentee ballot, that gets recorded. So an absentee voter can actually track their ballot all the way through being counted in that process.
Okay, so
Thank you.
Another addendum to that, please.
Go ahead.
So if my vote is questioned, would I be notified that that vote has been questioned and rejected?
Right now, absentee ballots are processed, on the day of the election.
Right.
And because of that time frame, if there was some defect, let's say you forgot to sign the affidavit envelope, there is no requirement that you are notified on the day of the election that deficiency exists, and your ballot would be rejected because of that. That would also be entered into the statewide database, which you would be able to see after the election. But there was an opportunity that was exercised to cure deficiencies back in 2020 when we held the election under pandemic conditions, and because of the much higher volume of absentee ballots because of the pandemic, there was a opportunity to pre-process absentee ballots before the election, and because of that, there was an opportunity to cure. But that provision went away after the pandemic conditions ended.
Okay, thank you. Now we have a question from Priscilla in Nashua. Priscilla, go ahead.
Hi, I was just wondering, you had indicated that a person can go out into the website to check their affiliation and see if they're registered. I'm just wondering, how secure is that website? Is that unique? Do I have to key in information that's unique to me to make sure that it's secure, or can anybody access that information? Say if somebody wanted to find out what my affiliation was.
So the way that it has been, up until recently is that you get onto the Secretary of State website, you type in your name and your birth date, and then your information will pop up for your town, you and your town. And what is available to you is simply the information that is on the public checklist. So there's not additional private information that pops up. Now, we are in the process of rolling out a brand new voter registration database, which has increased security measures. What I don't know at the moment is whether there is a PIN number that is sent back to you to be able to access your information or not. But it is the app is fairly easy to use, and I would encourage you to use it.
Thank you, Secretary Scanlan. As a reminder, if any of you have a question for Secretary Scanlan, just press *3 on your telephone keypad. If you're listening on Facebook, type your question into the chat. Now, Secretary Scanlan, some people are concerned about election integrity, worrying about election results accurately reflecting the will of the voters. You conducted an extensive examination on this issue in 2022. What can you tell us about that?
Well, so you're referring to the special committee on voter confidence that was held, and a report was issued about a year and a half ago. And I'm getting ready to issue a report on the progress that we have made on the recommendations that were made by that committee. What came out of the committee was, number one, is that most people have trust and faith in the elections that we conduct in New Hampshire. And there's good reason for that, especially when you consider all of the checks and balances that are at play throughout that process. Where there were issues, and this is my observation, where there were issues is in those areas related to elections that are not readily transparent. One of those is the use of voting machines, where a voter puts their ballot into the ballot counting device and then the machine does what it does, but the voter really doesn't see what's happening. At the end of the night, the machine reports results, and those are the results that are relied on to determine the outcome of the election. Another area is the absentee voting process, because the ballot actually leaves the possession of the clerk as it goes to the voter, and then it does what it does, goes through whatever process the voter is using, and then the ballot comes back to the clerk. But people really don't know what happens in between, and because of that, there's speculation. Even though our system, in my opinion, is very sound, there's speculation about what might happen, especially when you hear reports of hacking and machine failures in other places around the country. That gets translated in, could that happen here in New Hampshire? And so the way we deal with that is we just have to be as transparent with the general public as we can be about how these devices work and the processes that are involved in running an election, and make a much greater effort to educate the voting population on how elections work. And when a voter goes into a polling place, they know that they go to the check-in table, they get their ballot, they make their choices on the ballot, and then they deliver it to the moderator. But there are many other things at play in a polling place to guarantee that the process is working the way it should. And an example of that is the political parties themselves get to have a presence in the polling place, where the parties actually appoint what are formally called inspectors of election, but those individuals actually work as ballot clerks in the polling place, usually representing the two political parties, one person crossing a name off the checklist of a voter that's checking in, while the other person hands the voter the ballot. The parties also have an opportunity to place official challengers in the polling place, which get to have a special position where they can see and hear what is going on at the check-in table, and they can challenge the qualifications of voters if they want to. Polling places should be completely observable, so that anybody that wants to kind of view the entire process from a location outside of the rail can do that, and they can do it from the time the polls open until after the results are announced at the end of the night, and everything is packed up and shipped away. Those are the areas that we have to do more to explain to the general public, just so that they can have that confidence moving forward.
Good, thank you. As a reminder, if you have a question for Secretary Scanlan, please press *3 on your telephone keypad. If you're listening on Facebook, just type your question into the chat. We now have Jan from Stratham on the line. Jan, go ahead.
Thanks, everyone. First of all, thanks, everyone, for these great questions and the good information. And for the Secretary of State Scanlan, I just want to thank you for all this information, all your hard work. Hearing some of this, like the fact that our logs have not been updated, the normal protocol is 10 years. That seems ridiculous. So it's great to hear about the 4 years. I hope that goes through, and all the different things you've said, because I think, yes, people feel good about New Hampshire, probably because all the hard work you're doing and others are doing. And I think we all like transparency, and we all like all this information. So I just want to say thank you to all the people asking these great questions, and to you for all your hard work.
Well, thank you, Jan. We appreciate that.
Secretary Scanlan, will you run through some of the key dates for the upcoming New Hampshire state primary and the general election?
Sure. So actually, I have to get my political calendar here so I get that information accurately for you. But the big date that is rapidly approaching is June 4th, and we started the session off talking about that. But that is the last day for a voter to change their party affiliation before the September primary. So, voters that are concerned about that should go to their town clerk or get on the Secretary of State website and make sure that your registration information is up to date. And then the state, the filing period for state office opens up immediately after that on June 5th and runs through June 14th. So if any of the listeners out there are interested in running for state office or county office, that's the window to file your declarations of candidacy and get your name on the primary ballot. Undeclared voters, candidates who are running as independents or third parties have a different process that they go through, but they still have to file a declaration of intent during that June 5th to June 14th filing period. Excuse me. And then on September 10th is the state primary election. And then, the candidates that win the party's nomination will be placed on the November general election ballot, which will be held on Tuesday, November 5th this year.
So where can people go to find information on where to vote and any other questions they have about the election?
So the Secretary of State's website is a great resource for finding all kinds of election-related information, everything from your voter registration information to where the polling places are located in your town, who your local election officials are, and then there will be sample ballots that will be up as well, so that you can get on there and take a look at who your choices are going to be on Election Day. So the Secretary of State's website is sos.nh.gov, and then you can also call your town clerk or your supervisors of the checklist or your town moderator and get local information related to your elections.
Thank you. So this has been a really great call. You've shared a lot of wonderful information for all of us. And we are nearing the end of our time. So I want to thank Secretary of State David Scanlan for participating. And Secretary Scanlan, do you have any final remarks before we close?
I would just say that I am really proud of the way New Hampshire conducts its elections. There are certainly things that we can do to make improvements, and we are working hard at that. And I know that it's easy for me to say how great our elections are. The job we have to do is, prove it. Convince the voters out there that we run things in a good way, and so we're doing that as well. And I just encourage people to participate. And it would be great if the participation extended beyond just voting, but volunteer at a polling place. It's a rewarding civic duty, and just doing that in itself should give people faith and confidence in the way things work in New Hampshire. Just be a participant and engage in the process.
Wonderful. So I want to thank all of you for joining us today and participating in this Teletown Hall to talk about the upcoming elections. As a reminder, AARP is a nonprofit, nonpartisan member organization, and we've been working to promote the health and well-being of older Americans for more than 60 years. We hope that today's call was helpful to everyone. We appreciate your time. Thank you and have a great day. This concludes the call.